The smell of pine and wood smoke reached the 43rd floor before the elevator doors opened. That was the thing about the Caldwell Building in December. The lobby team went overboard every year, swags of fresh garland threaded through the brass handrails, white candles in the concierge alcove, a 12-foot Douglas fir standing in the marble atrium with its lights already blinking when I arrived home from the office on the first Monday of the month. I'd lived here long enough that the scent had become its own calendar. When I smelled pine in the elevator shaft, I knew it was December. When I smelled it on my floor specifically, that particular density, that cold green sharpness cutting through the heated air, I knew the building manager had propped the service door open again to carry garland up the freight stairs. I stepped out onto 43, set my bag down by the door, and stood there for a moment with my key in my hand. The hallway was quiet. 2 units on this floor, mine, and the Okafor families, who traveled every December to Lagos and left their unit dark. The building hum lived somewhere below me. Traffic from Burnside lived somewhere below that. Up here, at this hour, there was nothing but the pine smell and the low tick of the heating system cycling on. I unlocked the door and went inside. My name is Presley Holt. I am 31 years old. I have lived in this penthouse unit at the Caldwell Building in Portland, Oregon, for 3 years, and I own it, not rent it, own it, a fact that, until 8 months ago, precisely 2 people in the world knew: my attorney, Renata Solis, and my grandmother, Dora May Holt, who died 18 months before I bought the unit and who left me the means to do it. My parents believed I rented. My father believed, specifically, that I rented at a discount through a connection he'd helped me make, a former colleague of his named Gerald who managed a mid-rise in the Pearl District, and that I owed him, in some ongoing and unspecified way, a debt of gratitude for that introduction. The fact that I had never lived in Gerald's building, that I'd thanked my father politely for the referral and then quietly purchased the Caldwell unit 11 months after Dora May's estate cleared probate, was information I had chosen not to correct. Not yet. My father's name is Wade Holt. He is 58 years old and has operated a mid-sized commercial real estate brokerage in Sacramento for 22 years. He is good at his work. He is better at his self-image. The two sometimes overlap. When they don't, the self-image wins without a contest. My mother's name is Colton, her mother's maiden name, carried forward as a first name, a Southern family habit that had followed the Holts from Savannah to Sacramento 2 generations back. She is 54, soft-spoken in company, and almost entirely silent when my father is in a room. Not the silence of peace. The silence of someone who has learned which sentences cost too much. My sister is Dallas, 27. She lives 6 blocks from my parents in Sacramento. She'd moved back after a graduate program that didn't finish and a relationship that did. She called me approximately 4 times a year, and 3 of those calls involved asking me something. This is the family I come from. I say that without editorializing. These are the facts. I set water on for tea and stood at the kitchen window looking out over the West Hills. The city below was starting to string its lights. Bridges lit amber over the Willamette, the hills dark and forested behind them, a low cloud deck pressing down that would probably bring rain by Thursday. Portland in December was not dramatic. It was wet and gray and close, and I had come to love it for exactly those qualities. The way it asked nothing of you aesthetically, didn't perform. My phone buzzed. I looked at it. Dad calling. I set it face down on the counter and let the kettle finish. He would call again. He always did, in sets of 2. First call without leaving a voicemail, second call 40 minutes later with one. The voicemail would be casual in its construction and pointed in its meaning. That was his style. He'd learned it somewhere in his 20s and refined it across decades of negotiating lease terms with people who had more leverage than he wanted to acknowledge. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water, dropped in the tea, and picked the phone back up. 2 missed calls, 14 minutes apart. He'd shortened the interval. I pressed play on the voicemail. Presley. It's Dad. Call me back when you get a chance. Your mother and I want to talk to you about the holidays. Nothing urgent. Nothing urgent was his tell. Nothing urgent meant he had already made a decision and was giving me the courtesy of hearing it framed as a conversation. I had learned this the same way my mother had learned her silence, by cost. I called him back. He answered on the first ring. There she is, he said. Hey, Dad. You get my message? Just now. What's going on with the holidays? A pause, not long, not awkward, just the pause of a man arranging his words. I heard the Sacramento background behind him, the particular quality of air conditioning in a house that runs it year-round despite the climate. A TV somewhere. My mother's footsteps, light and even, across tile. Your mother and I have been talking, he said, and we've decided to do Christmas a little differently this year. We're going to keep it close. Just immediate family. Your sister, your Aunt Magnolia, is coming up from Fresno, the Wheelers from next door. We're going to do the whole thing at the house, properly, for the first time in years. I waited. It's going to be a full house, he continued, and honestly, Press, and I say this with love, we think it'd be better for everyone if you spent the holiday up in Portland. You've got your life up there. You've got friends. It doesn't make sense for you to drive all the way down here and make things complicated. I didn't fill the silence. He filled it instead. You know how things get when you're here. Last Easter, that whole situation with Dallas. That situation, I said, was Dallas telling me my apartment looked like a government waiting room and me declining to agree. You declined with a lot of force. I said I don't think so and changed the subject. Presley. His voice shifted, not louder, just denser, like something compressing in it. You make things hard. I'm not going to sit here and catalog it for you. You know what I mean. I recapped the pen sitting on my counter. Set it back down, parallel to the edge of the notebook beside it. So the decision is already made, I said. I'm telling you as a courtesy. You're telling me I'm not welcome at Christmas. I'm telling you it would be better if... Dad. My voice stayed steady. You're telling me I'm not welcome at Christmas. I just want to be clear that we both understand what's being said. A breath on his end. Not an apology breath. A recalibrating breath. You were always so dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being precise. Same thing, with you. I didn't answer that. Look, he said, and his voice came back to something approximating warmth, the way it did when he'd said the hard thing and wanted to move through it efficiently. You're 31 years old. You're established. You don't need Christmas in Sacramento. Take a trip somewhere. Go to Cannon Beach. Isn't that the kind of thing you do? It is, I said. Then do that. We'll do something in the spring. Come down for your sister's birthday. We'll make a real thing of it. Dallas's birthday was in March. He had never made a real thing of it before. Okay, Dad, I said. Okay, he echoed. He sounded relieved. This was the version of me he preferred, the one that moved on quickly, didn't require management. We'll talk before then. Tell your friends Merry Christmas. I'll do that. He hung up. I stood at the kitchen window for a long moment. The tea had gone from too hot to exactly right. I picked it up with both hands and looked out at the lights on the Burnside Bridge. A Max train crossed it, lit orange from inside. It disappeared into the west side, and the bridge went quiet again. Dora May Holt, my father's mother, not my mother's, had been a precise woman. Not cold, precise. There was a difference she used to insist on. Cold was the absence of warmth. Precision was the decision to apply warmth only where it did something useful. She had been an accountant in Savannah before she married my grandfather and moved to Sacramento in 1971. She had kept her own books, household, personal, the small rental property she'd bought in 1984 with money she'd saved before my grandfather had known what she was saving. She'd told me about that property once, in her kitchen in Sacramento, when I was 19 and visiting without my parents. She'd told me the way she told me most things, with a cup of coffee, no preamble, and the expectation that I would follow the logic. Your grandfather thought I was saving for a new roof, she said. I was saving for a property. When I bought it, he was upset for about 3 weeks. Then the rent checks started coming. Did he ever bring it up again? Once. I showed him the balance sheet. She'd set down her cup. Numbers are very clarifying to the right kind of man. They close arguments faster than apologies do. I had written that down that night. I still had the notebook. She left me $2.1 million. Outright, no trust, no conditions. My father received a sum I was never told. My mother received jewelry and the kitchen table, the one that had been in the family since Savannah. Dallas received a college fund that had already been depleted and a letter I never read. My father did not speak to me for 11 weeks after the will was read. When he did start speaking to me again, he did not mention the inheritance. He spoke about it only once, obliquely, at a family dinner 6 months later. Your grandmother always had a soft spot for you. I don't know what you did to earn it, but there you are. I said nothing. He moved on. I had been moving carefully ever since. The Caldwell penthouse had been listed at $1.85 million. I paid $1.78 million after Renata negotiated the seller down on the elevator maintenance assessment. The unit was 2,400 square feet, which was more than I needed and exactly what I wanted. A second bedroom I used as an office, a kitchen with a window over the city, a living room with ceilings high enough that I'd been able to hang a credenza-length canvas from a Portland artist I'd discovered at a First Thursday show in the Pearl District. The building had a private elevator. Key fob access, dedicated to the 43rd floor. My floor, exclusively. The building also had a parking garage with 2 deeded spots registered to my unit. Key fob there as well. My parents had been here once, 8 months ago, in April, when my father had a conference in Portland and my mother came along for the weekend. I had told them I was house-sitting for a friend who traveled for work. My father had walked through the unit with the particular gait of a man appraising something, hands loosely behind his back, pausing at the kitchen window the same way I did. Nice place, he'd said. Your friend does well. He does, I said. What does he do? Tech? Software. My father nodded, satisfied. The answer confirmed something for him, not about the apartment's owner, but about the category of person who could afford this. Tech? Software. Not his daughter, who worked as a senior operations manager for a regional logistics company and who he had, on 2 documented occasions, described to other people as good with spreadsheets. He'd used the elevator twice that weekend. Both times he'd noted how smoothly it ran. Before they left, he'd asked me to pass along his compliments to my friend about the building management. I said I would. After the call, I sat down at my desk in the second bedroom and opened my laptop. I had a rhythm for evenings like this, work that didn't ask anything of me emotionally but required enough attention to crowd out other things. Inventory tracking. Vendor correspondence. A quarterly logistics summary I was behind on. I opened the summary and worked through 2 sections before I stopped and looked at the wall. Above my desk I'd hung a photograph from a trip I'd taken 2 years ago, the Oregon coast near Manzanita, the kind of winter day when the Pacific comes in gray and enormous and the sky is indistinguishable from the water at the horizon. I'd driven down on a Saturday without telling anyone where I was going. Eaten fish and chips from a shack near the beach. Driven back in the dark with the radio off. I looked at the photograph and thought about what my father had said. Not the words. The structure of the words. The way he'd built the sentence, it would be better for everyone if you spent the holiday up in Portland, so that the exclusion landed as a favor. A gift, almost. He'd given me freedom. He'd released me from the obligation of a difficult holiday. He'd done me, in the framing of his own sentence, a kindness. I had heard that structure before. I had heard it over a kitchen table in Sacramento, framed slightly differently. Your grandmother always had a soft spot for you. I don't know what you did to earn it. Not, your grandmother loved you. Not, your grandmother saw something in you worth leaving something to. I don't know what you did to earn it. As if the inheritance were a transaction. As if love, from Dora May, must have been purchased somehow, because what other explanation was there for leaving more to a granddaughter than to a son? I closed the laptop. I didn't make a decision that night. I want to be clear about that, because the story that followed had a particular shape, and I don't want to make it sound like the shape was always there, fully formed, waiting for me to step into it. That night I simply closed the laptop and made a second cup of tea and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the bridges for a long time. What I did think about, standing there, was the elevator. The smooth-running elevator that my father had complimented twice. The key fob in my bag that controlled it. The 2 deeded parking spots in the garage. The front door with its Schlage commercial deadbolt and the secondary thumb turn I'd had installed when I moved in, because I'd wanted 2 points of security and the building management had accommodated it without comment. I thought about how much of a place a person controls when they own it outright versus when they are a guest in someone else's space. Then I thought about Christmas. About a table set for people who had been invited. About gifts piled under a tree that I had been told, with love, I was not welcome to be near. About 88 missed calls. I didn't know that number yet. That came later. But standing there with my tea going cold in my hands and the rain starting its quiet work against the 43rd floor glass, I felt something settle in me that was not anger and not grief and not the particular soreness of being told you are too much for the people who were supposed to want you most. It was more like a door, closing quietly, from the inside. What Dallas didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had been here before. Not the exclusion. Not exactly. But the scaffolding of it, the internal logic, the particular way my father constructed the perimeter of what was acceptable and who was permitted inside it. I was 22 when I first understood it clearly. This was before the logistics company, before Renata and the Caldwell Building. I was finishing my degree in Portland. I'd chosen University of Portland over the UC system, which my father had treated as a mild personal insult from the moment I mentioned my acceptance, and my grandfather, Dora May's husband, had his first significant health event. A cardiac episode. He was in the hospital in Sacramento for 5 days. My mother called to tell me. My father did not call. I drove down. 14 hours, 2 tanks of gas, no notice, because I had simply assumed, that family meant you showed up when something was happening. I arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning and found my grandmother in the waiting room with a cup of terrible coffee and a crossword she wasn't working. The waiting room had the specific quality of hospital waiting rooms at that hour, the overhead lights too bright, the chairs arranged in rows that faced nothing, a television bolted to the wall showing morning news with the sound off. The whole place was suspended in the particular stillness of people who had been there long enough to stop expecting something to happen. She looked up when I walked in. She didn't say anything. She just reached out her hand and I took it and sat down next to her. She was wearing the green and brown quilted bag across her lap like a lap desk, the way she always carried it, an enormous thing, worn soft at the handles, that she'd had since before I could remember. She had her crossword on top of it and a mechanical pencil and a pair of reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead. The coffee was in a paper cup that she'd wrapped in a paper napkin. The whole arrangement was precise, self-sufficient, the arrangement of a woman who had come prepared to wait and had organized herself accordingly. We sat like that for a few minutes without speaking. The television showed a weather map. Outside the waiting room window, Sacramento was going gray and bright at the same time, the morning sun hitting the valley haze and making it luminous. "How is he?" I finally said. "Stable," she said. "Since about 4 this morning. We're waiting for the second set of blood work." She took a sip of her coffee. "The doctor is young. He explains things carefully, which I appreciate." "How long have you been here?" "Since the ambulance." She said it the way she said things that had been hard, as a plain fact, not an appeal. "About 11 hours. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." "You came when you knew." She picked up the pencil. "That's the thing about coming. You come when you know. You didn't know until your mother called, and then you came." She looked at the crossword. 14 hours. You didn't stop. "Once," I said. "Gas?" "Once," she said, as if that settled something. My father arrived 2 hours later. He walked into the waiting room, saw me, and stopped. "Who told you to come?" He said. "Not, I'm glad you're here. Not, thank you for making the drive. Who told you to come?" Dora May looked up from her crossword. "I didn't tell her," she said. "She came." My father's jaw moved once. He looked at me, not angry, exactly, more recalibrating, the way he always did when something had happened outside the structure he'd anticipated, and then he said, "You should have called first." "My grandfather is in the hospital," I said. "Still?" He moved past me toward the nursing station. He had his briefcase with him. He had stopped somewhere first, or he had driven straight from the office, I couldn't tell which, and the fact that I couldn't tell felt like its own information. Dora May waited until he was out of earshot. Then she reached into the green and brown bag. I could hear the particular sound of it, the zipper she never fully zipped, the rustle of all the things she kept organized inside it in a system only she understood, and pulled out a second crossword she'd torn from a magazine. She set it on my knee. 12 across, she said, is giving me trouble. See what you can do. I worked the crossword for an hour while my grandfather stabilized. My father stayed on his phone in the corridor, pacing a section of about 20 feet, back and forth, in the way of a man managing things from a distance that required his management. My mother arrived at noon and sat between us in a way that managed to acknowledge both people without fully facing either. My grandfather came home 4 days later. He lived another 9 years after that. The word that 12 across wanted was meridian. I worked it out from the crossing letters and the clue, something about noon and a geographic line, a deliberate ambiguity the puzzle constructor had built in. When I showed it to Dora May, she looked at it for a moment and then made a small sound that was not quite satisfaction and not quite surprise, the sound of a person who had suspected an answer and is now confirmed. "Of course," she said. "Both things at once." That visit was the beginning of my education in a specific subject, what it means to be present in a room where your presence has not been requested. And alongside it, a second education, quieter, what it means to be handed a hard thing by someone who trusts you to work it out, without being told what the answer is supposed to be. I learned both slowly, the way you learn most structural things, not in a single lesson but through accumulation. Christmases where I said the wrong thing about my father's brokerage at the wrong moment. Thanksgivings where Dallas said the right things and I watched my father's attention follow her like a compass needle finding north. Easter dinners where my mother would set a hand briefly on my arm in the kitchen, not saying anything, just that contact, a small acknowledgement that something was happening in the room and she knew it was happening, even if she could not or would not name it. The labor was its own education. I had kept track of that too. Not as a grievance, not, at least, at first. I kept track because I was, constitutionally, a person who tracked things. It was why I was good at my job. It was why Dora May had given me the 12 across and trusted me to figure it out. 2 years before she died, when I was still in my mid-20s and still hopeful about various things, I had helped my father through a lease dispute on a commercial property in Midtown Sacramento. He'd received a poorly drafted sublease agreement from a tenant who was trying to carve off 2 of the 5 floors and relet them independently, a move that would have voided the master lease and cost my father approximately $340,000 in contracted rental income over the remaining term. He'd called me on a Tuesday. "You understand contracts," he said. It was not a question. "Some," I said. "Look at this and tell me what I'm seeing." He sent over the sublease. I spent 11 hours across 3 evenings reading it, reading the master lease behind it, reading the Oregon and California statutes on subletting restriction. The tenant had tried to argue cross-jurisdictional ambiguity, which was a reach but not a completely foolish one, and drafting a 4-page summary with 3 recommended responses ranked by cost and risk. My father took the summary to his attorney, who used 2 of my 3 recommendations. The dispute resolved in my father's favor. The tenant backed down. The $340,000 stayed in the contracted column. My father called me afterward. "My attorney sorted it out," he said. I didn't correct him. That was the first document I had kept. Not a legal document, my own. A folder on my laptop labeled reference, and inside it a plain text file I'd started the night after that phone call, with a single entry dated and described, sublease dispute, Midtown property. 11 hours. Outcome. $340,000 retained. Credit, attorney. Over 4 years, the file had grown to 31 entries. The second entry had come 3 months after the first, in the spring, when my father had a conference in Seattle and asked me, the day before it started, as though the thought had just occurred to him, whether I could cover a site inspection he'd scheduled in Portland for a property he was considering acquiring. The inspection was already calendared with the property manager. My father needed someone to walk the building and report back. He framed it as a favor, something I'd be happy to do since I was already in Portland. The property was a 4-story office building in the Lloyd district. The inspection took most of a Saturday. I walked every floor, photographed the HVAC units and the roof drainage, asked the property manager about the most recent foundation assessment, and spent 2 hours afterward writing up what I'd found in a format that matched the due diligence checklist my father's firm used. He read the report on the flight home and called me from the Seattle airport to say it looked thorough and he'd have his team follow up on the roof drainage issue. His team. I logged it. Lloyd District Inspection, Saturday. 6 hours. Property acquisition due diligence. Report forwarded to Wade's team. The third entry was different in kind, which was part of why I'd kept such careful notes about it. It was not a task my father had assigned me. It was a task I'd taken on without being asked, for reasons that had seemed obvious to me at the time and which I had only later understood as a form of labor that does not announce itself. My grandparents' 50th anniversary had fallen on a Saturday in June. The plan, such as it was, had been my father's plan, a dinner at a restaurant in Sacramento, a small gathering, the immediate family. My father had made the reservation. My mother had ordered a cake from a bakery she'd used before. Dallas was coming in from wherever she was living at the time. What my father had not done, and what I discovered when I called my grandmother 3 weeks before the dinner to ask if there was anything she needed, was confirm that my grandfather's oldest surviving friend, a man named Frank who had known my grandparents since 1968 and who lived in Fresno, had been invited. My grandfather wanted Frank there. He'd mentioned it to my grandmother, who'd assumed my father had handled it, because my father had said he was handling the whole thing. Frank had not been invited. I called Frank myself. He was 81, still drove short distances, and was entirely willing to make the trip to Sacramento if someone could help him book a hotel room near the restaurant. I booked the hotel room, 2 nights, because I thought he might want to visit longer than just the dinner, and added his name to the reservation. My grandfather's face when Frank walked into the restaurant was the thing that made it worth the 3 calls and the booking fee. My father, at the end of the dinner, caught me looking at the 2 old men and said, "Glad that worked out. Your mother always said Frank should have been on the list." Your mother. Not. You figured out what was missing and fixed it. Not. Thank you. Your mother. I logged it. Anniversary dinner coordination. Frank's hotel, 2 nights. Confirmed addition to reservation. 3 hours. Credit, Mom. That was how I'd learned to keep track of the thing underneath the thing. Not because I plan to use it. Because things that are not tracked are things that can be rewritten. The file had 31 entries by the time my father told me I was not welcome at Christmas. 11 hours on a lease dispute. A Saturday on a roof in the Lloyd district. A hotel booking for a man my grandfather had wanted at his table. 28 more items in between, errands run, calls made, a full weekend spent helping my parents move a storage unit from one facility to another when they downsized a decade of accumulated belongings the summer my grandmother got sick. That one had taken 2 days. I'd rented the van myself. My father, recounting the move to someone at a brokerage function the following month, had said they'd had the kids down to help. The kids? Dallas called on Thursday. I was at my desk when the phone buzzed, working through a procurement discrepancy a vendor had flagged that morning, a routing error that had cascaded across 6 regional depots and added 3 days to a delivery window we'd promised a client. I was in the middle of tracing which decision point had introduced the error when my sister's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. "Hey," she said. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure." "Okay, so." She took a breath, the kind that preceded a performance of casualness. "I just wanted to call because I feel like things got a little weird last Christmas and I don't want it to carry over, you know? Like, I love you and I want things to be good between us." I waited. "And I know it's kind of awkward with the whole holiday thing this year," she continued, "but I just think, Dad's right that it's been a stressful dynamic when we're all together, and honestly you seem so much happier up in Portland, like you have your own thing up there." "Did Dad ask you to call me?" I said. "A beat." "No. Dallas. He mentioned it might be nice if I reached out. That's not the same as asking me." I pulled the cap off the pen on my desk. Set it down. "What did he tell you to say?" "He didn't tell me to say anything. He said," another breath. "He said it would be better if we were all aligned before Christmas so nobody had bad feelings about it. So he wanted you to call and make sure I was aligned." "Presley, can you just," her voice picked up an edge. "Can you just not do this? I'm calling to be nice. I'm calling because I actually do want things to be okay between us. You could just say thank you and move on." "Thank you," I said. Silence. She stopped. "You know what, fine. Fine. I tried. I know you did. Sometimes I don't understand why you make everything so difficult." Her voice was climbing now, the edge going sharp. "You always do this, you get like this and then everyone else is supposed to just manage around it. Dad's stressed, Mom's stressed, and you're up there in Portland in your fancy rented apartment being difficult." "I should get back to work," I said. "Of course you should." She said it the way a door sounds when it's shut a little too hard, not quite a slam, the barest excess of force. "Merry Christmas, Presley. She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand. The procurement trace was still open on my screen, the routing error still sitting at the decision point where someone had manually overridden a depot assignment without logging a reason. I looked at that for a moment, the override with no reason attached, and something about it felt familiar in a way I didn't examine too closely. Then I went back to work. On the Friday after Dallas called, I drove to my storage unit in Northwest Portland. I went twice a year, spring and fall, to verify that everything was where it should be, that nothing had been damaged by moisture or temperature, that the unit's contents were still in the order I'd organized them in. It took about an hour. I brought coffee and worked through the boxes methodically, checking, resealing, updating my inventory list on my phone. In the back left corner, in a fireproof document case I'd bought from a shop in the Pearl District, were Dora May's papers. Not all of them. Most of her estate documents were with Renata's office. But the personal papers, the ones she'd sent me 2 months before she died, in a flat-rate priority box with no note, just the box and its contents and her return address in Sacramento, those were in the fireproof case, and I had not looked at them in 14 months. I crouched down, spun the combination on the case, and lifted the lid. The papers were in the order I'd put them: a bundle of letters from the 1970s in their original envelopes, a copy of the deed to the Fresno rental property she'd bought in 1984, sold in 2019 before she died, that money had gone into the estate, 3 handwritten pages in her accounting precise script that I had read several times and that documented, in her own words, the rationale for her will. And under those 3 pages, the thing I had not fully examined when it arrived. I reached into the case and took out a plain manila envelope, letter-sized, sealed and then unsealed. She had opened it herself before sending it, I could tell from the tier pattern, with my name on the front in her handwriting. Inside the envelope was a document I recognized as a type without immediately understanding its full implication: a second deed. Not the Fresno property. The Fresno property had been sold. This deed was for a property in Portland. A commercial property. A building on the corner of Northwest 14th and Petty Grove, 2 stories, currently operating as a mixed retail and office space, assessed in the most recent county record at $2.3 million. Dora May had bought it in 2009. She had never mentioned it to anyone, as far as I knew. The deed had been in her estate, it would have been inventoried, it would have been included in the probate, and it had been, somehow, in the papers she'd sent to me before the probate closed. I had received this 14 months ago. I had looked at it, understood it only partially, filed it in the case, and not looked at it again. At the time, I'd been in the middle of the Caldwell purchase, and the document had felt like something to examine later, when I wasn't already consuming every spare hour of attention I had. Later had not arrived. I unfolded the deed slowly. It was a standard Oregon statutory warranty deed: grantor, grantee, legal description, recording information. The grantor was Dora May Holt. The grantee line had been left blank. Not empty. Blank. As if the document had been partially prepared and then stopped. As if the name that belonged there had not yet been decided, or had been decided and then deliberately withheld. I sat back on my heels in the storage unit and looked at the deed for a long time. The building on Northwest 14th and Petty Grove. $2.3 million, assessed value, current. Grantee, blank. I refolded the deed. Placed it back in the envelope. Set the envelope on top of the other papers and closed the case. I would need to call Renata again. Not today. Today I needed to think about what this meant, whether the blank grantee line meant the deed was unrecorded, whether an unrecorded deed defaulted to the estate, whether the estate had closed with this property accounted for or missed, and what any of those answers meant for who currently owned a $2.3 million building 12 blocks from the Caldwell Building. I stood up, locked the case, and checked the rest of the boxes on autopilot. On the drive back, I passed Northwest 14th and Petty Grove. I hadn't planned to. I turned the corner by reflex. I drove that route sometimes when I went to the storage unit, and there was the building, 2 stories, brick face, a coffee roaster on the ground floor with a hand-lettered sign in the window, an architectural firm's logo on the second-floor glass. The building was occupied. Well maintained. The brick had been repointed recently. The windows were clean. I pulled to the curb and sat there for a moment. My phone buzzed. My father's name on the screen. I looked at the building. Looked at the phone. I let him finish, let it ring through to voicemail, and then I pulled back into traffic and drove home. By the time I reached the Caldwell parking garage and pressed the button for my elevator, I had 17% battery left and a thought I could not quite complete, that there was something Dora May had been building for a long time, something she had built in the particular way she built everything, quietly, precisely, with a patience that looked like stillness from the outside and was in fact just very deliberate motion. I did not know yet if I was the grantee. I did not know yet if I was the point. But I stood in the elevator as it rose, smooth and private and completely mine, and I thought about the blank line on a deed, and about a woman who had understood that numbers close arguments faster than apologies do, and the thought that was trying to complete itself pressed at the back of my sternum like something waiting to be let in. The elevator reached 43. The doors opened. Somewhere on my phone, my father's voicemail was waiting. I left it unplayed. The next morning I called Renata Solis. Her office was in the Kearney Building, 12 blocks from mine. We had worked together for 3 years, first on the purchase of the Caldwell unit, then on a contract dispute with a former employer, then on the quiet process of making sure my name was correctly registered as sole owner on every document associated with the building, the parking easement, and the elevator access covenant. That last one had taken longer than expected. The building's original developer had written a slightly ambiguous clause about elevator access for penthouse units, ambiguous in the way that clauses sometimes are when the developer expects the unit to be owned by a company rather than an individual. Renata had spent 2 months resolving it. I now held an access covenant registered separately from the unit deed itself, which meant the elevator wasn't just practically mine, it was legally, documentarily, unambiguously mine. I had not found this interesting until approximately 9 hours ago. Presley, Renata said. What do you need? A question, I said. If I wanted to change the key fob programming on the elevator, the parking garage, and the front door deadbolt, all 3, how quickly could that happen? A pause. Change it how? New codes? New fobs. New codes. Complete rekey on the deadbolt. For cause, or preemptive? Preemptive. Another pause. The elevator and garage are building management. You'd need to submit a written request and they'd handle the programming, probably 3 to 5 business days. The deadbolt is yours outright, you can rekey it yourself or call a locksmith same day. What about the private elevator access covenant? Does it give me any authority to restrict access independent of building management? I heard Renata set something down. Yes, she said slowly. The covenant specifically grants the penthouse unit owner exclusive control over access authorization for the 43rd floor elevator call. You can authorize and deauthorize fobs. Building management programs them, but the authorization list is yours to dictate. So if I wanted to deauthorize existing fobs. If existing fobs have been issued with your authorization, yes. If they were issued without your authorization and you didn't know about them, that's a different conversation. She paused. Have fobs been issued to someone without your authorization? I thought about my father. His hand, easy and comfortable, pressing the elevator call button on the panel in the lobby. The way he'd taken the fob I offered him, here, use this, it'll call the elevator directly, and slipped it into his coat pocket with the automatic ease of a man accepting what is his. I had issued that fob. In April. House sitting for a friend. They were issued with my authorization, I said. I want to withdraw it. Then you can. I'll draft you a letter to building management today. You can submit it with a simple fob deauthorization list. Standard form, I've done it before for another client. She paused again. Presley, is everything okay? My voice stayed even. Everything is fine, I said. I just want to get the access list cleaned up before the holidays. Before the holidays. The phrase sat in my mouth the way certain phrases do, both entirely true and not at all the full picture. I'll send you the draft this afternoon, Renata said. Thank you, I told her. I hung up, looked out the window at the rain still working the glass, and picked up the pen on my desk. The same pen I had recapped the night before, while my father explained to me, with love, that I was not welcome at Christmas. I uncapped it. I wrote one line at the top of a clean page, access list. Before the holidays. And then I stopped, because the rest of it, the full shape of what I was deciding, was not yet something I needed to write down. It was just a door. And I had not yet finished closing it. Renata's draft arrived at 3:47 that afternoon, clean and precise. The way everything she wrote was 2 paragraphs, a subject line that said Penthouse Unit 43A, Access Authorization Update, and a numbered list with 3 line items. Line 1. Deauthorization of elevator fob serial ending in 4471. Line 2. Deauthorization of parking garage fob serial ending in 4472. Line 3. Request for complete deadbolt rekey, front entry, and secondary thumb turn, Unit 43A, with 2 replacement keys issued to unit owner only. I read it twice, signed the PDF, and sent it back. Then I went to make dinner and did not think about it again that evening. That was a choice, not suppression, not avoidance, just the deliberate decision to let a process run without standing over it. I had started something. It would move at the speed paperwork moves. There was nothing useful in hovering. I made pasta. I ate it standing at the kitchen window. The rain had cleared and the city below had that particular post-rain clarity, the bridges reflecting in the Willamette in long vertical streaks of amber and white. I washed the bowl, dried it, put it away. My phone stayed face up on the counter the whole evening and my father did not call again. He called on a Wednesday, 10 days later. Not my phone, the building's front desk intercom, which rang through to the unit. It was 7:40 in the evening. I was at my desk, working through a sequence of carrier contracts that my company had been renegotiating for 6 weeks, and the intercom's tone was so unusual, I heard it perhaps 3 times a year, that for a moment I didn't recognize it. I pressed the answer button. Ms. Holt. The front desk attendant, a calm man named Bernard who had worked evenings in the Caldwell Building since before I moved in. There are 2 individuals in the lobby requesting access to your unit. They don't have their fobs. They say they're your parents. My hand on the intercom button was completely still. Tell them I'll be right down, I said. I closed my laptop. I took a breath, not to compose myself, just to finish the breath I was already taking. Then I took the elevator down. My father was standing near the lobby's garland-strung front desk with his coat still on and his jaw set at the angle it took when he had been made to wait for something he expected to receive immediately. My mother stood slightly behind his left shoulder, the way she always stood in public spaces where something was about to happen, her hands in her coat pockets, her expression careful. I walked toward them across the marble lobby. My father's eyes found mine and held them. Your fob isn't working, he said. I know, I said. I had the access list updated. A beat. Updated how? The fobs I issued in April were deauthorized. I submitted the paperwork to building management 2 weeks ago. His jaw moved. He looked around the lobby, at Bernard, who was attending to something on his desk with professional disinterest, at the elevator bank, at me. Why would you do that? Because I own the unit, I said. The access list is mine to manage. We were in Portland, he said. We came to talk to you. You haven't been returning my calls. I've been busy. Presley. His voice dropped into a register I recognized, the negotiating register, the one he used when he wanted to signal that the social portion of a conversation was over and something more serious was beginning. We drove 4 hours. In December. In the rain. We'd like to come up. I looked at him. Then at my mother, who met my eyes briefly and then looked at the floor. Come up and talk about what? I said. He glanced at Bernard. Not here. Then tell me what it's about and I'll decide if it's a conversation I want to have tonight. His expression shifted, something tightening around the eyes. That's a hell of a way to talk to your father. I'm asking a reasonable question, I said. The property, he said, lowering his voice. Your grandmother's property in Portland. I know you found the deed. The lobby was very quiet. The garland on the brass railing didn't move. How do you know that? I said. Because Renata Solis called the Sacramento probate court. He said it flatly, as if the logic were obvious, as if I should have predicted this the way he was predicting it. That's how. You're not as subtle as you think you are. I counted the pause instead of filling it. Come up, he said, less an invitation than a pressure. We'll talk about it. There are things you don't understand about how that estate was handled. I understand quite a bit, I said. You understand what a lawyer told you. He took a step toward me. Not aggressive, measured, the step of a man who had spent 30 years moving across rooms toward people who had something he needed. You don't understand the full picture. There were reasons the property wasn't inventoried. Good reasons. Reasons that protect you as much as anyone. I'd like to hear those reasons, I said. From you. Right now. Here. He looked at Bernard again. Presley. Here, or not at all tonight, Dad. His mouth went flat. He looked at my mother, who was still looking at the floor, and then back at me. Fine, he said. Fine. He straightened slightly. The property was in a complicated position when your grandmother died. There were questions about the deed. You've seen it, you know the grantee line was blank. An incomplete deed creates title ambiguity. My attorney advised me that including an asset with an incomplete title in the inventory could delay probate, possibly for years, and it was better to handle it separately once the estate closed. Handle it how? I said. Transfer it. Through a separate process. Outside probate. Transfer it to whom? He paused. One beat too long. To the appropriate parties, he said. Dad. My voice was even. Transfer it to whom? The estate was closed in good faith, he said, and his voice had shifted again, the negotiating register hardening into something that was not quite a wall but was building toward one. Everything was handled correctly. If there are questions about the property now, we can address them properly, through the right channels, without making accusations. I haven't made any accusations, I said. You've had your attorney contact the probate court. That's not nothing. That's due diligence. He stopped. Recalibrated. When he spoke again his voice was quieter, and something in it that I had heard before, the register beneath the negotiating register, the one that appeared when the structure was under real pressure. Listen to me. Your grandmother made some choices near the end of her life that were not clear. The deed was one of those choices. It wasn't properly completed, it wasn't recorded, and when I was handling the estate, I made a judgment call about the cleanest way to proceed. That's all. And the judgment call was to not inventory a $2.3 million asset. The judgment call was to handle an ambiguous situation without creating more ambiguity. His voice tightened. I was the executor. I had the authority to make that call. You had the authority to administer the estate, I said. Not to remove assets from it. The lobby was silent. My father looked at me. He was very still. The negotiating register was gone, and the register beneath it was gone, and what was left was something I had seen only a few times, the unstructured version of him, the one without a frame around it. You've been talking to that lawyer too much, he said. I've been talking to my lawyer, I said. She's putting ideas in your head. She's answering my questions. He leaned forward slightly. I want you to stop the probate inquiry. I want you to call it off. We can handle this as a family, quietly, correctly, without courts and attorneys and paperwork. That's what your grandmother would have wanted. She didn't want us in courtrooms. She didn't want lawyers picking over everything she built. What did she want? I said. He opened his mouth. Because she sent me the deed, I said. She found my address in Portland, she packed it in a priority box, she sent it to me specifically. If she didn't want me to know about the property, she had a very unusual way of showing it. Something moved through his face, fast, controlled, but there. She was confused near the end. She wasn't thinking clearly. The deed was probably in a stack of papers she sent without fully understanding what she was sending. Dora May, I said, was the least confused person I have ever known. He was quiet for a moment. And then his posture shifted, not softening, something more like a pivot, the way a negotiation moves when the first approach has not worked and the opening is still there in the other direction. He glanced again at my mother, who had not looked up from the floor, and when he turned back to me there was something in his face that I recognized but had not expected to see here, the thing he reached for when everything else had not produced the result he wanted. Not pressure now. Proximity. Presley. His voice changed, dropped out of the register that had been doing the work of the last 10 minutes and into something lower, something that was reaching for a different kind of claim. Listen to me. I know we've had our difficulties. I know this year has been, he paused. I know Christmas didn't go the way it should have. That's a conversation I'm willing to have. But right now, standing in this lobby, I need you to hear me as your father and not as the executor of an estate. As your father. I waited. Your grandmother loved you, he said. I know that. She showed it in ways that I didn't always understand. The money she left you, the property, I'm not going to stand here and pretend those things don't matter to me, because they do. But they're not more important than this family. You understand? Whatever that property is worth, whatever the lawyers find when they go looking, it is not more important than the fact that you have a father and a mother and a sister, and we are all standing here in December in a lobby, and there is still time to handle this the right way. My mother had looked up. She was watching him now instead of the floor, not his face, exactly, but a point somewhere near his shoulder, the way she watched when she wasn't sure what she was watching for. What is the right way? I said. Drop the inquiry. Come home at Christmas, or in the spring, whenever you're ready. We sit down together, the four of us, and we talk about what your grandmother wanted and we find a way to honor it that doesn't involve courts. He paused. That's what she would have wanted, Presley. I knew her for 58 years. She didn't want her family in a courtroom. She sent me the deed, I said again. He exhaled, not heavily, just a breath, the breath of a man who has tried the thing that works and found that this time it isn't working. That may be, he said. But the deed is incomplete. It's not a legal instrument in its current state. Whatever she intended, she didn't complete it, and you were the executor, I said. And I was the executor, he said. And I made the call I thought was correct. To leave a $2.3 million asset off the inventory. To handle an ambiguous situation. Dad. My voice stayed even. I'm going to be in touch through Renata. His expression shifted. Something closing in it, the way a window closes when the temperature outside drops past the point of keeping it open. This family doesn't need to be torn apart over a piece of property. Whatever you think happened, whatever that lawyer has told you, we are your family. We are all you have. Don't throw that away over this. I looked at him. Those words, in that sequence, landing in the lobby's quiet air. My mother's eyes came up again, all the way, this time, not just toward his shoulder. She looked at me directly. Her expression was careful in the way it was always careful in public spaces where something was happening, and underneath the careful was something else, something that wasn't agreement with what had just been said. I held her gaze for a moment. Then she looked away. Good night, Dad, I said. Presley. I turned and walked back across the marble floor to the elevator. I pressed the call button. The elevator opened immediately, smooth, private, mine, and I stepped in. The doors closed. Through the small gap as they shut, I saw my father standing in the lobby with his coat still on, his hands at his sides, his mouth moving around something he had not finished saying. The elevator rose. The elevator reached 43 and opened into the hallway. I walked to my door, unlocked it, went inside, and stood in the dark kitchen for a moment without turning on the lights. The city was out there beyond the window, doing what it always did, bridges lit, river moving, rain working the glass. I stood with my coat still on and let the dark be what it was. I thought about what my father believed about me. He believed I rented an apartment. He believed my grandmother had sent me, in a confused near-death state, a box of papers she hadn't meant to send. He believed I was dependent enough on the structure of this family, on Christmas dinners I had just been disinvited from, on phone calls I had stopped returning, that the sentence about having nothing and no one would function the way it was intended to function. I thought about the specific architecture of that sentence. The way it required you to believe you were small. The way it worked only if you'd already accepted, somewhere below articulation, the premise it was built on, that what you had was only the people in that lobby, and that their withdrawal was therefore the withdrawal of everything. I thought about the first time I'd heard a version of it. Not those exact words. An earlier draft of the same structure. I had been 23, back in Sacramento for a long weekend, sitting at my parents' kitchen table with my father across from me and the breakfast dishes still between us. He had been talking about the logistics company I'd just been hired by, my first real position, the one I'd found without his help, and something about his description of it, the particular words he used, had made me understand that in his accounting of my life I had been given a job, and the person who had given it to me was, in some sense that he hadn't made explicit, him. Not the company that had hired me. Not the resume I'd spent 3 months building after graduation. Not the 3 rounds of interviews I'd gone through. Him. I had said something, I don't remember what, exactly, some version of the correction, and he had looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "You don't know yet how much of this is connected. Everything you have right now. You'd be surprised how quickly that changes when you don't have people behind you. Not, we are all you have. But the same sentence, at an earlier age. The same structural requirement, believe you have nothing without us. Believe the ground beneath you is borrowed." I had not believed it then. I had been 23 and I had still been trying to believe it wasn't true rather than simply knowing it wasn't, and the difference between those two things is the difference between a decade of careful maneuvering and a door that closes quietly, from the inside, on a December evening while the bridges glow amber through the rain. I turned on the kitchen light. I hung up my coat. I called Renata. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call. "He came to the building," I said. "I know. The probate court notified me that an inquiry was made on the case file. Someone pulled the docket. It happened this afternoon, before he drove up." A pause. He knew I'd been looking before he got in the car. "He wants me to drop the inquiry." I assumed he would. Her voice was even, unhurried. "Presley, I need to tell you something I found this afternoon, while you were presumably dealing with him in the lobby." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Tell me." I pulled the property records for the Northwest 14th building going back to 2009, when Dora May bought it. She purchased it outright, no mortgage, cash transaction. It's been generating rental income since 2011, when the first ground floor tenant moved in. She paused. That rental income has been deposited, consistently, for the last 11 years, into an account. Not Dora May's primary account. A separate account, held in the name of the property's registered managing entity. "What's the registered managing entity?" "A single-member LLC," Renata said, "registered in Oregon in 2010. The LLC's registered agent is a law firm in Lake Oswego that handles property management structures. The single member, the owner of the LLC, is listed as DM Holdings." "DM," I said. "Dora May." I was quiet for a moment. "So she set up an LLC to manage the building's income?" "Yes. And the LLC has been active continuously since 2010. It filed annual reports, maintained its registered status, collected rent. And here is what I need you to understand about this." Renata's voice slowed slightly, the pace she used when she was about to say something she needed me to retain precisely. "When Dora May died, the LLC did not dissolve automatically. An LLC survives its member's death unless the operating agreement specifies otherwise. The LLC's assets, including the rental income account, passed according to the LLC's own succession terms, not through the probate estate." "What are the succession terms?" A pause. "That's what I spent this afternoon finding. The law firm in Lake Oswego held the operating agreement in escrow. I spoke with their managing partner at 4 o'clock. Another pause, longer. "The successor member, the person who, upon Dora May's death, became the sole owner of DM Holdings LLC, is named in the operating agreement." "She named you, Presley. You have been the owner of the LLC since the day she died." The kitchen was very quiet. "For how long has that account been receiving rental income?" I said. 11 years of income. 2 tenants, sequential leases. Current monthly deposit is $14,200 from the coffee roaster and $6,800 from the architectural firm. Those numbers have stepped up periodically over the leases." She paused. "I'm still compiling the full accounting. But the balance in the LLC's operating account, as of this month, is just over $890,000. I set my hand flat on the kitchen table. A plain gesture. Something to press against. "She built it for me," I said. "She built it for you," Renata said. "The building, the LLC, the rental income. The deed with the blank grantee line. I think I understand it now. She intended to transfer the building itself to you directly, complete the deed, get your name on the grantee line. She ran out of time. But the income structure, the LLC, that she completed. That one she got across the line. And my father, as executor, either didn't find the LLC. Or found it and made the same judgment call he made about the deed," Renata said. "The LLC isn't a probate asset. It wouldn't appear in a standard estate inventory, it's a separate legal entity. But a thorough executor, acting in good faith, would have flagged it and investigated its succession terms. He had her business records. He had access to her files. I noticed, in that moment, the pen on the kitchen table. The same pen. I had moved it at some point without thinking about it, carried it from my desk, set it here, parallel to the edge of the table the way I always set things down. "Renata," I said. "The $890,000 in the LLC account. Is that mine?" "You are the successor member. The account belongs to the LLC. You own the LLC." A brief pause. "Yes." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after we hung up. Then I went to the second bedroom, opened the closet, and took down the box I kept on the upper shelf, a plain banker's box, the kind sold in office supply stores, with a lid that pressed down snugly and a label on the side I'd written in black marker 3 years ago, reference. I carried the box to the kitchen table and set it down. I reached in and lifted out the folder on top, a green hanging folder, older than the rest, the plastic tab slightly yellowed, and set it aside. Under it was a second folder, craft-colored, labeled in my own handwriting, DM Estate/Personal Papers. I reached in and took out the folder. I opened it on the table and unfolded the first document, slowly, because it was old and the fold lines had set hard, and laid it flat. It was not the deed. The deed was in the storage unit. This was a letter, handwritten, 4 pages, in Dora May's accounting precise script. I had read it several times. I knew what it said. But I read it again. She had written it 18 months before she died, which meant she had written it knowing she was sick and not yet knowing how sick. The handwriting was fully controlled, no tremor, no compression, the letters spaced the way they always were, each one given exactly the room it needed. She wrote the way she filed. Nothing wasted, nothing ambiguous. The letter was addressed to me. She wrote about the Fresno property first, the one she'd bought in 1984 with the money she'd saved before my grandfather knew she was saving. She wrote about what it had meant to her to hold something that was entirely her own, that did not require anyone's permission or awareness, that was simply hers because she had built it and it existed. She wrote, "I learned early that what you announce, others will manage. What you build quietly, you keep." She wrote about the Portland building. She had bought it in 2009 because she had visited me twice in Portland during my university years and had seen, she wrote, that I would stay. "You weren't visiting the city. You were already from it. I could see that in how you walked." She had bought the building as a structure to grow income until I was ready to receive it. She had set up the LLC because an LLC could be transferred in a single line of an operating agreement, outside probate, outside the management of any executor. "I have done what I can do from here," she wrote. "The rest is yours to complete." And then, at the bottom of the 4th page, a line I had read before but which landed differently now, on a December Wednesday in a kitchen above the lit bridges of Portland, after an evening in a marble lobby. "Your father is a capable man who has never understood that capability is not the same as entitlement. He will manage the estate correctly as far as he understands it. What he does not understand, he will not look for. This is also something I have built for." I refolded the letter along its original creases. Slowly. Laid it flat on the table beside the folder. I remembered the crossword in the hospital. Both things at once. I sat there for a while. I called Renata the next morning and told her to file the petition. She filed it on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, my father's phone was ringing with a notification from the Sacramento Probate Court that estate of Dora May Holt, case number 2022 PR04471, had been reopened on petition of an interested party citing an omitted asset. He called me at 6:17 p.m. I answered. "What did you do?" His voice was tight, not the negotiating register, not the register beneath it, but something rawer than both. A man who had been watching a situation he thought he controlled move sideways in real time. "I filed a petition to reopen the estate," I said. "To account for an omitted asset. I told you we could handle this as a family." "You told me to drop the inquiry," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." "Presley." A breath. "Do you understand what you're starting? Do you understand what this looks like for our family? For me? I have a professional reputation in Sacramento. I have clients who know the probate court. If this becomes a public record..." "It already is a public record," I said. "Probate is public. You know what I mean." His voice climbed slightly. "You are doing this to hurt me. That's what this is. You're angry about Christmas and you're blowing up this family over a piece of property because you couldn't let one holiday go. My voice stayed even. Dad, this isn't about Christmas. Then what is it about? It's about a building that was supposed to come to me and didn't. It's about an estate that was closed without a $2.3 million asset being inventoried. It's about an LLC your mother set up specifically so I could inherit it outside your management, and a rental income account with nearly $900,000 in it that has been sitting there for 3 years. Silence on his end. Complete silence. I let it run. 900,000, he said finally, and his voice had changed entirely, flattened, stripped of its operating registers, something almost unrecognizable underneath. 892,000, as of last week. Renata has the full accounting. Another silence. Then, she never told me about the LLC. No, I said. She didn't. I didn't know, he stopped. Started again. If I had known about the LLC, I would have handled it correctly. I didn't know it existed. The law firm in Lake Oswego held the operating agreement. They were her registered agent. A thorough review of her business records would have surfaced them. I didn't have access to all of her business records. She kept things, your grandmother kept things compartmentalized. His voice was moving between registers now, unstable, which was something I had never heard from him before. Presley, listen to me. I need you to understand that I did not intentionally exclude that asset. I made a judgment call on the deed because the title was ambiguous, and I missed the LLC. I missed it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm perfect. I made a mistake. I recapped the pen on the table. Set it down parallel to the edge of the notebook. Renata will be in touch, I said. Wait. His voice hardened again, quickly, the instinct of a man who defaults to pressure when concession doesn't work. Just wait. Before this goes any further, before lawyers and courts get any deeper into this, I need you to think about what you're doing. I need you to think about this family. We are all you have, Presley. At the end of the day, when everything else is gone, the property, the money, all of it, we are all you have. Think about that before you blow this up. The second time. Same words. Same sequence. Same structural requirement. Believe you are small. Believe the ground beneath you is borrowed. I had heard it built in stages, an earlier draft of it at 23, the first full delivery in the lobby, and now this, the phone version, deployed after concession had not worked and pressure was the remaining tool. 3 versions of the same instrument. The phrasing identical each time, which was its own kind of information about how often the sentence had been used, how well it had worked before, how deeply the groove was worn. I listened to it settle in the kitchen air. Renata will call you Monday, I said. I hung up. The week between the petition filing and the Lake Oswego firm's meeting passed the way those weeks do, everything on the surface continuing in its ordinary order, and underneath it, the low continuous pressure of waiting for something to complete itself. At the office I was 2 days behind on a carrier renegotiation I'd promised my director by the following Friday. I worked through it methodically. 6 carriers, 3 contract cycles, a rate adjustment that needed to be modeled across 4 regional depots before it could be presented as anything other than a guess. I sat at my desk for 3 days and did the modeling. There is a particular quality to work you do when you need something to occupy the part of your mind that would otherwise be running loops. It doesn't distract you exactly, but it holds a certain amount of the processing load, and what's left is cleaner, less circular. I had always worked this way. It was why I was good at the job. It was also, I understood now, why Dora May had given me the 12 across. Not to give me something to do while waiting, but because she had recognized in me someone who thinks most clearly when the hands are occupied with a hard problem. The carrier renegotiation came out well. I submitted it on Thursday. My director said it was thorough. I ate dinner at the kitchen window each night that week, pasta twice, a curry I'd made too much of, leftover soup. I watched the rain work the glass and the bridges do what they always did, and the week moved as weeks move when something large is in motion just below the surface. On Tuesday I received an email from the Multnomah County Recorder's office confirming that the deed filing had been received and was in the processing queue. The language was administrative, the font the kind that had not been updated since a previous decade, the message exactly what I had expected it to say. I read it twice. I printed it and put it in the craft-colored folder. On Wednesday, a florist delivered a small arrangement to my office, white flowers, something winter, a card from Renata's office that said only, first recorded deed. Congratulations. It was the kind of thing Renata did that reminded me why I had chosen her for the Caldwell purchase in the first place. She understood which milestones were worth marking even when no one else was marking them. I put the flowers on my desk and looked at them while I finished the rest of the routing adjustments. My father called twice more after the Friday call. I let the first go to voicemail. He left one, shorter than usual, with the texture of a man who had said the hard thing and was waiting to see what happened next. The second I picked up, muscle memory moving faster than decision. Is this going to a hearing? He said, without preamble. Yes, I said. That's how the petition process works. Whitmore says it could take months. It could. And there's nothing, he stopped. I recognized the stop. It was the stop of a man who had been about to ask whether there was a way to resolve this outside the court process, and who had recognized, partway through the sentence, that he had already tried that argument in a marble lobby on a Wednesday evening and it had not produced the result he wanted. No, I said. There isn't. A pause. Okay, he said. Flat, stripped of its layers the way his voice had been stripped since the arithmetic had hit him. I'll call you when there's news, I said. He hung up. I noticed, when I set the phone down, that my hand on the desk was still. Not tense, not deliberately composed, just still, the way a room is still after a particular kind of conversation ends. The following Tuesday, Renata met with the managing partner of the Lake Oswego law firm. I was not present for the meeting. She'd advised me not to be, but she called me afterward from her car in the building's parking garage, the way she did when she had something she wanted to say before she'd written it up formally. Two things, she said. First, the operating agreement has been authenticated. You are the successor member of DM Holdings LLC. The firm has been holding a notarized letter from Dora May instructing them to notify you directly upon her death. They sent it, 18 months ago, to an address she had for you. An old address. You didn't receive it. My apartment before the Caldwell, I said. I moved. She didn't have the updated address. The letter came back undeliverable. The firm held it, waiting for you to make contact, their protocol for returned correspondence. You made contact when I called them last week. She paused. The second thing. The managing partner had a sealed envelope in Dora May's file. She left it with them when she finalized the operating agreement. Addressed to you, held for delivery in person only, at the firm's discretion, once you had been confirmed as the successor member. I was quiet. He's mailing it to my office, Renata said. Overnight. I'll have it tomorrow morning. I'll call you when it arrives. That night I did not sleep well. Not from agitation. I want to be precise about this, because the distinction matters. I was not churning over what had happened, not replaying the lobby scene or the phone calls or the specific register of my father's voice when he said 900,000 and the arithmetic hit him in real time. What I was doing was something more like waiting, the way you wait for the last piece of a thing to arrive when you have already understood the shape of the whole and you just need the final element to confirm it. I lay in the dark at 2:15 in the morning and looked at the ceiling and thought about sequences. About the particular intelligence of a person who constructs a chain that requires one specific order of events to complete it, and who trusts the person she has built it for to follow the chain correctly, step by step, without being told what comes next. Who sends a deed with a blank line to an address she knows, and trusts that the blank line will be recognized as a question, and trusts that the question will lead to the next question, and the one after that, until the chain is complete. I thought about the 14 months the blank deed had sat in the fireproof case in the storage unit. All the times I had gone to the unit, spring and fall, methodically, checking the boxes and resealing and updating my inventory, and passed within arm's reach of it without opening the case to look. I had known it was there. I had carried the awareness of it the way you carry something you have decided to attend to later, when the other things are cleared. The Caldwell purchase had been the other thing, and then it had been settled, and then there had been other things after that, and later had kept not arriving. Until my father told me I was not welcome at Christmas. I had not understood, until I was lying in the dark that night, that the timing was not incidental. That the thing which had cleared space for the question was the exclusion, the moment when the scaffolding of a particular relationship became visible in its full structure, when my father said the quiet part plainly enough that I could see the whole architecture of it at once. And once I could see the architecture, I could see the blank grantee line for what it was, not an oversight, not an incompleteness, but the beginning of a chain. The Caldwell's heating system cycled on in the hallway outside my bedroom. The rain had come back against the windows, working quietly, the way it always worked in December, not dramatic, not demanding, just present and patient, doing what it was going to do regardless of whether anyone was watching. I closed my eyes. Eventually I slept. The envelope arrived at 10:42 Wednesday morning. Renata called at 10:51. I was at the office. I left without explaining where I was going. My assistant knew, by now, that the Renata calls sometimes required this, and took the elevator down to the street and walked the 12 blocks to the Kearney building in the December rain without an umbrella because I had forgotten it and didn't go back. Renata's office was on the 8th floor, a corner room with a view of the West Hills when the weather was clear, which it wasn't. The cloud deck had come down low enough to erase the hills entirely. Out the window there was only gray, a uniform gray that made the building feel suspended, the city below reduced to sound and suggestion. She was at her desk when I came in and she stood up and handed me the envelope without preamble. It was a standard business envelope. Cream-colored. My name on the front in Dora May's handwriting, the same handwriting as the letter in my reference box, controlled and precisely spaced, each letter given exactly the room it needed. I reached in and took out the single folded page inside. I unfolded it slowly, the paper heavier than standard stock, the kind she used for correspondence she meant to be kept. The fold lines were crisp, she had creased this deliberately, the way she did everything deliberately, nothing wasted. I laid it flat on Renata's desk and looked at it. It was a completed deed. The same Oregon statutory warranty deed form as the one in my storage unit, same grantor, same legal description of the Northwest 14th property, same recording information. Same layout, same county header across the top. But this one had a grantee line. Grantee, Presley and Holt. My full name. Both names. The way she had written my name in birthday cards and letters since I was old enough to have mail addressed to me, not Presley, not Press, the way my father shortened it when he was in a particular register. Both names. The full thing. And below the legal description, in the execution block, Dora May's signature, in the same controlled script as the letter, as every document she had ever produced. And beside it, the notary seal, pressed into the heavy paper, slightly embossed, the county and date legible when I angled the page toward the light. Dated 14 months before she died. 2 years before the estate closed. Before the probate, before the closing, before the inventory that had left this building off the page. She had signed a completed deed. She had given it to the law firm to hold. She had written a letter instructing them to deliver it to me in person only, once I had been confirmed as the LLC's successor member, which meant the deed could not reach me without the LLC being found first, and the LLC could not be transferred to me without the operating agreement being authenticated. And the operating agreement could not be authenticated without someone making the call that Renata had made to Lake Oswego last week. A sequence. Each step requiring the previous one. None of them available without someone following the chain. She had known I would find the blank deed. She had sent it. She had known I would ask the right questions. She had spent 31 years watching me ask them. I stood at Renata's desk with the completed deed flat in front of me and the gray December sky where the West Hills should have been, and I understood, fully and finally, what she had built. Not just the financial structure of it, the LLC and the rental income and the escrow sequencing. The deeper structure. The thing underneath the thing. She had constructed the chain so that the only person who could complete it was someone who asked questions in the right order and did not stop when the answers were incomplete. Someone who tracked things. Someone who drove 14 hours without being asked. Someone who worked the 12 across because it had been handed to them and trusted, without explanation, to find the answer. She had built it for me because she had built it around who I was. I looked up at Renata. "Can this be recorded?" I said. "The deed is complete, signed, and notarized," she said. "Yes. We file it with Multnomah County. Once it's recorded, the property transfers to you. The LLC you already own. Between the two. What's the total?" She had clearly already run the number. She didn't pause. The building at current assessed value plus the LLC account balance plus the 2 active leases at their current monthly rate, annualized, she set a single sheet of paper on the desk beside the deed. A clean column of figures, totaled at the bottom. The kind of document she produced when she wanted the arithmetic to speak for itself. $3.19 million. I looked at the number. I looked at the deed with my name on the grantee line. I looked at the number again. File it, I said. Renata picked up her phone and called her paralegal. My father found out on a Friday afternoon, 11 days before Christmas. Renata had told his attorney, a Sacramento estate lawyer named Whitmore who had apparently been fielding anxious calls from my father for 2 weeks, that the petition had been accompanied by a completed, notarized deed predating the estate's close, held in independent escrow, which established clear title to the property outside the estate's distribution entirely. The LLC and its assets were a separate matter, but the deed alone was sufficient to resolve the question of the building's ownership. Whitmore had called Renata back within the hour. His call, Renata told me later, had lasted 22 minutes, longer than she had expected given the clarity of the document position, and she had been able to tell from the pauses on Whitmore's end that he was managing a client who was in the room with him, asking questions in a lowered voice and waiting for the answers with the particular compressed patience of a man who has been blindsided by something he had believed was under control. She had given Whitmore the accounting, the $890,000 in the LLC's operating account, the 2 active leases, the assessed value of the building, the total. She had told him she had the full documented succession chain, from the operating agreement to the notarized deed to the escrow release letter, and that she would be filing all of it with the county by end of business. Whitmore had said he needed to confer with his client. Renata had said that was fine, and that Whitmore could reach her on Monday. Whitmore had called back in 35 minutes. He wanted to know, on behalf of his client, whether there was any basis for a challenge to the deed's validity. Renata had told him, without editorial comment, that the deed had been notarized 14 months before Dora Mayholt's death, at a time when she was not under any documented medical or cognitive impairment, and that the law firm in Lake Oswego had held it in escrow pursuant to explicit written instructions from the grantor. The deed was complete, the chain of custody was documented, and the title position was, in her view, unassailable. Whitmore had said he understood. There had been a pause on his end, the kind of pause Renata recognized as the pause of a man relaying information to someone nearby who was not pleased with it. She had waited. She was good at waiting. She had the same quality Dora May had, in that specific respect, the patience of someone who has organized themselves for the long wait and brought a second puzzle just in case. Then Whitmore had said that his client would like to speak with his daughter directly, if that was possible. Renata had called me. He knows, she said. Whitmore says he wants to talk. He can talk to you, I said. He asked to speak with you directly. I looked out the window at the city. The rain had stopped for the first time in 4 days. The West Hills were visible, dark green against a pale sky that had gone thin and clear the way Portland's sky goes after the weather finally breaks, not dramatic, just honest, the hills exactly where they had always been, waiting for the cloud cover to lift. Put him through, I said. My father's voice, when it came on the line, was something I had not heard before, stripped of every register, the negotiating frame and the pressure underneath it and the raw thing beneath that, all of it gone. What was left was something quieter and more undefended than anything he'd produced in the lobby or on the phone the previous week. Just a man's voice, without architecture. She planned this, he said. Your grandmother planned all of this. Yes, I said. She planned it so I couldn't, he stopped. The unfinished sentence sat in the air between us. He didn't finish it. I thought about the various ways it might have ended, so I couldn't intercept it, so I couldn't manage it, so I couldn't decide where it went, and I understood that he had stopped because any ending he gave it would be the same admission, just worded differently. She didn't trust me with it, he said. She trusted me with it, I said. A long silence. $3 million, he said. 3.19, I said. Another silence. Longer. I heard him moving somewhere in whatever room he was in, Sacramento, his house, maybe his office. The particular quality of the silence suggested he was not sitting still. Presley. His voice, even stripped down to its minimum, still reached for the structure it knew, the same reflex, the same groove, worn into the material of how he moved through difficult conversations. We are all you have. Whatever you think of me, whatever has happened here, you need to understand that at the end of all of this, when the lawyers are gone and the paperwork is done, we are all you have. The third time. The word sat in the air between us. I looked at the West Hills, clear and green above the city. I thought about a woman at a kitchen table in Savannah, before Sacramento, keeping her own books. I thought about her moving west and keeping the books still, privately, building the kind of record that does not depend on anyone else's acknowledgement to be true. I thought about her in 2009, walking into a commercial building on Northwest 14th and Petty Grove and seeing, whatever she had seen, whatever had made her stop and recognize it as the right shape for what she was building. I thought about her in the year she got sick, sitting at that table again, writing a 4-page letter in handwriting that was still fully controlled, still perfectly spaced, and folding it into an envelope addressed to me. The sentence in the air between us, that sentence, deployed for the third time in its identical form, required me to believe that I had nothing. That without this family's permission and acknowledgement and presence, the ground I stood on was borrowed. I thought about what Dora May had understood about that sentence. She had understood it for 58 years of watching it operate. She had never said anything about it directly. She had simply built the thing that made it untrue, and she had built it so carefully that even the person who had deployed the sentence could not undo what she had made. That was the full weight of what she had given me. Not the building, not the $890,000, not the total. The thing she had given me was simpler and more durable, the evidence, in documented and recorded form, that I had always been standing on my own ground. That the ground had never been borrowed. "I'll be in touch through Renata," I said. He was quiet for a moment. 3.19, he said again, and the way he said it the second time was different from the first. The first time had been the arithmetic registering, and the second time was something else, something closer to a man who has been walking in one direction his whole life and has looked up and found the landscape entirely different from what he expected. Not catastrophe. Something harder than catastrophe, a reckoning. "Yes," I said. She had it notarized. Not a question. A man working through a sequence he hadn't known existed, assembling it piece by piece, the way you work out a crossword from the crossing letters. She had it notarized 2 years before she died and gave it to a law firm to hold. She didn't tell me. "No," I said. "She didn't tell anyone." "She told the people she needed to tell," I said. "The law firm. The notary. Me, in the way she could." Another silence. Shorter this time. "I need to think," he said. "That's fine," I said. He hung up. I set the phone on Renata's desk and looked at the West Hills through the window for a moment. The pale clear sky was starting to go amber at the edges, the particular late afternoon amber that happens after December rain breaks, when the low sun catches the tree line and makes it briefly vivid before the light goes. I picked up the completed deed, my name in the grantee line, Dora May's signature in the execution block, the notary's seal pressed into the heavy paper, and handed it to Renata. "File it," I said again. She already had her paralegal on it. By end of business that Friday, the deed was in the recording queue at Multnomah County. By Monday morning, it was recorded. The building on the corner of Northwest 14th and Petty Grove was mine. I drove past it that Monday on the way to the office. Not by reflex this time. Deliberately. I had decided the previous night, sitting at the kitchen window with the county recorder's confirmation email still open on my phone, that I would drive past it on the way in. That when it was mine, when the recording was complete and the deed was in the county's system, I would go and look at it as such. Not as a future thing. Not as a complication. As a fact. I turned onto Northwest 14th and pulled to the curb in front of the coffee roaster's hand-lettered window, Caravan Coffee, EST. 2021, and sat there for several minutes with the engine running and the heat on, looking at the brick face and the clean windows and the architectural firm's logo on the second floor. I thought about what Renata had told me, that the ground floor lease had 2 years left on its current term, that the architectural firm was month to month, that when those leases turned there would be decisions to make. Rate adjustments, probably. Possibly a new tenant on the second floor. The kind of practical decisions that belong to someone who owns a building. I thought about what it would mean to make those decisions, not as a credential, not as something to announce, but as a simple fact about the world that was true whether or not anyone else knew it. The way it was true about the Caldwell. The way it had been true, for 3 years, about a penthouse unit that my father believed was rented at a discount through a connection he'd helped me make. A man in a green apron came out of the coffee roaster's door to collect a sandwich board from the sidewalk. He looked up briefly, registered that I was sitting at the curb watching the building, decided this was not remarkable, and carried the sandwich board back inside. The door swung shut on the warmth and coffee smell of the interior. The street was quiet. The brick face of the building was just there, solid and unremarkable, the way things are when they have been standing long enough that they no longer need to announce themselves. I thought about Dora May buying this building in 2009. I had been 19. She had come to visit twice that year, once in October, once in February, and both times we had walked along the river in the particular way we walked together, which was not a social walk but a working walk, the kind where the movement was incidental to the conversation and the conversation was incidental to the thinking. The October visit I remembered clearly. We had walked along the Willamette on the east side, past the farmers' market stalls still open in early autumn, and she had asked me, not as if it mattered, not as if the answer would surprise her, just as a crossing letter she needed for the puzzle she was working, whether I thought I would stay in Portland after graduation. I had said yes without thinking about it. Just yes, immediate, unqualified, the way you answer a question whose answer you've known for a while without articulating it, the way Meridian arrives when you've been working the puzzle from both directions and the letters suddenly align. She had nodded. We had kept walking. She had bought a cup of cider from a vendor and handed it to me and said something about the light on the river, how the flat October light made the water look like hammered tin. We had finished the walk and gone to eat Vietnamese food on Southeast Division, and she had sat at my kitchen table after and read while I finished a paper that was due. She had said nothing else about Portland. And then, the following year, she had bought a building 12 blocks from where I would one day live. I had been 20 years old. I had not known. I would not know for 11 years. She had built a thing for me and waited, for over a decade, for me to be ready to receive it, not to tell me, not to prepare me, just to build it and trust that I would find it, and to set up the conditions so that when I did find it, I would be capable of knowing what to do. She had bought the building when I was 20. By the time I found the deed, she had been gone for 18 months. Between those 2 points, 13 years of rental income, 2 tenants, an operating account that had been quietly growing in the particular way that accounts grow when no one touches them except to add to them. 13 years of patience. 13 years of building, in the quiet, for a person who didn't know yet that it existed. What you announce, others will manage. What you build quietly, you keep. I pulled back into traffic and drove to the office. My father called again on Wednesday. 10 days before Christmas. The locksmith had already been, the Caldwell's deadbolt rekeyed, 2 new keys cut, both of them in the drawer of my desk where I kept things that needed to be exactly where they were. Building management had confirmed the FOB deauthorization was complete. The building on Northwest 14th was recorded in my name. The LLC's operating account had been formally transferred to my management. Renata had handled the paperwork, the Lake Oswego firm had countersigned, and the first time I logged into the account portal and saw the balance sitting there, still and substantial, I had closed the laptop and gone to stand at the kitchen window for a while without doing anything in particular. Renata had initiated the estate petition in Sacramento, which would run its own course over the coming months through the probate court, examining the question of whether the deed's omission from the inventory had been accidental or intentional. That process would take time. I was prepared to let it take the time it needed. I had been thinking about time differently since the conversation with Renata in which she'd told me that the building had been generating rental income since 2011, 13 years, consistently, without my knowing. If Dora May could wait 13 years for something to find its proper moment, I could wait a few months for a probate court to do its work. I had also been thinking about the photograph. My mother had said she would send it, and I had been thinking about it in the particular way you think about something before it arrives, not with impatience, but with a certain attentiveness, a readiness to receive it. The image I held in my mind was my own memory of that day at Manzanita, the Pacific, the gray and enormous sky, the way the horizon had disappeared into the water so that there was no clear line between the two. A day I had not told anyone about. A day that was, as far as I had known, entirely private. And there it had been, in a plain wood frame, on a dresser in Sacramento, watched over for years by someone who had understood something about me that I was still in the process of fully understanding myself. My father called at 8 in the morning, which was early for him. I was on my second cup of coffee and looking at the routing dashboard when the phone buzzed. I answered. "I want to talk," he said. "Just talk. No lawyers." "I'm listening," I said. He was quiet for a moment, gathering, I thought, the way he always gathered before he said something he'd prepared. But when he spoke, it didn't sound prepared. It sounded like a man who had spent a week in a room with a thought he couldn't make smaller, turning it over, finding it the same size from every angle, and who had finally simply decided to say it. "I told your mother," he said. "About the property?" "About all of it. The LLC. The deed. The account." A pause. "She knew about the building. Your grandmother told her, years ago, not the details, just that there was something in Portland she was building for you. She said it the way she said things that were settled, that it was being handled, that it would be there when it was needed. Your mother didn't know about the deed or the LLC. Your grandmother kept those from her too." Another pause, shorter. "Or she says she didn't know. I believe her." "I believe her too," I said. He was quiet again. In the quiet I could hear the Sacramento background, not the air conditioning this time. The quality of the air itself, the particular stillness of a house where a particular conversation has happened and the rooms are still holding the shape of it. "Your mother cried," he said. "Not about the money. She said your grandmother always knew you were the one who would carry things forward. She said your grandmother told her that once, years ago. That you were the one who would know what to do with things. With the hard things." He paused. "She said it like it wasn't a surprise." A beat. He was quiet long enough that I thought he had reached the end of what he'd come to the phone to say. Then, "It surprised me," he said. I didn't answer immediately. I let the sentence be what it was. There was something honest in it, not strategic, not angled, just the plain acknowledgement of a man who had not known something and had discovered that his not knowing had been, in some sense he was still working out, itself a kind of choice. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words. Flat, unornamented, without a frame around them. I had waited a long time, not consciously, not strategically, but in the way you wait for something without knowing you're waiting for it, to hear my father say those 2 words without a qualifier attached. Without "I'm sorry you feel that way" or "I'm sorry it came to this" or "I'm sorry but you have to understand." Just the 2 words, period, nothing behind them trying to soften the landing or redirect the meaning. "Okay," I said. "I don't expect that to fix anything," he said. "It doesn't," I said. "But I heard it." A long pause. "The probate petition," he said. "Whitmore says it'll go to a hearing. I'm not going to fight it. I want you to know that. Whatever the court determines about the inventory, I'm not going to fight it." "I appreciate that," I said. "I want to say," he stopped. Started again. The stopping and starting had become its own rhythm, a man navigating a sentence he had not been able to find the end of in a week of trying. "I want to say that I didn't intentionally exclude the property. I've said that before and I'll say it again. But I know that I didn't look as hard as I should have. I made a judgment call on the deed and I stopped there. I should have kept looking." A pause. "I should have kept looking." I recapped the pen on my desk. Set it down. "I know," I said. "We're not," he stopped again. Tried again. "I know we're not going to be fine. I know this isn't the kind of thing that goes away in a phone call. But I don't want a breath. I don't want you to think that you have nothing. That's not, I shouldn't have said that. The way I said it." He was circling the sentence. Not repeating it, acknowledging it. Trying, in the limited and imperfect way available to him at 58, to take back the structural requirement it had imposed by naming that he had imposed it. That the sentence had been a tool. That at the end of a difficult week, he was looking at the tool and finding it smaller than he had believed it to be. It was not a full reconciliation. It was not a clean ending. But it was a man sitting with a thought he couldn't make smaller, who had picked up the phone anyway, and that was not nothing. "I know I have things," I said. "I have always known that." He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had the texture of something that had been held for a long time and was finally being set down. "She knew it too," he said. "Your grandmother. She always knew it." "Yes," I said. "She did." We didn't speak for a moment. Not an uncomfortable silence, the silence of 2 people who have said what could be said and have arrived, temporarily, at the edge of it. "Call your mother," he said finally. "She'd like to hear your voice." "I will," I said. I called her that afternoon. She answered on the first ring and did not say anything for a moment. I could hear her breathing on the other end, steady, careful, the way she was always careful. And then, as if she had made a decision, she said my name, just my name, in the voice she used when she forgot to be careful, Not the voice she'd maintained for 30 years in rooms where my father was conducting something. The other voice. The one underneath. The one I had heard occasionally at kitchen sinks and in car rides and in the brief contact of a hand on an arm in an Easter kitchen that meant I know something is happening here and I am here with you in it. We talked for an hour. She told me things I hadn't known. That Dora May had called her, in the last year of her life, more often than usual, not long calls, not dramatic ones, just calls that had the quality of a person organizing her thinking out loud to someone she trusted to hold it. That in one of those calls, Dora May had said, with the directness she used when she wanted something to be remembered, "Presley is the one who will know what to do with things. When the time comes, she'll know. She's been knowing for a while. She just hasn't decided what to do with it yet." My mother told me that when she heard that, she had felt, in the particular way that true things feel, that it was not news. That she had known it already in some form she hadn't had a name for. She had said yes, she knew, and Dora May had said good, that's one less thing, and they had moved on to something else, the way Dora May always moved on when a thing had been said that needed to be said. She told me about the photograph. Dora May had kept a photograph on her dresser, a photograph of me, taken at the Oregon coast, the winter day I'd driven down to Manzanita alone. The Pacific coming in gray and enormous, the sky indistinguishable from the water at the horizon. Some early moment of the day, when I'd just gotten out of the car and walked to the edge of the beach and stood there. I had not known Dora May had that photograph. I had not taken anyone with me that day. I had told no one where I was going. How did she get it? I said. I don't know, my mother said. It was just there. I noticed it the first time I visited her after you'd moved to Portland, so it must have been before that, or around that time. It was in a plain wood frame, the kind she used for things she wanted to see every day. I thought about that for a moment. The specific quality of a person who can obtain a photograph of someone standing alone on a beach, on a day that person didn't mention to anyone, and put it in a plain wood frame on their dresser. She was watching. She was always watching. When she died, my mother said, when we were packing everything up, I put the photograph aside. I didn't know if it should go to you or stay with us. I kept it. I still have it. Can you send it to me? I said. Yes, she said. I was hoping you'd ask. She told me one more thing, and she said it carefully, the way she said things she had been holding for a while and had decided it was time to release. She told me that in the weeks before Dora May died, when it was clear that the time was short and the conversations had taken on the particular quality of conversations being had for the last time, Dora May had asked about me. Not about Dallas, not about the estate. She had asked about me. Whether I was all right. Whether I had what I needed. My mother had said she thought so. She thought Presley was all right. Dora May had considered that. And then she had said, she has what she needs. She's been building it a long time, same as me. She just doesn't know yet that she's been doing it. I sat with that for a moment. Not just the building, not the LLC, not the documents held in escrow in Lake Oswego. The fuller thing, that Dora May had watched me keep a reference file, in effect, my whole life, had watched me track things, show up uninvited to hospitals, spend 11 hours on a lease dispute and log the result with the credit correctly attributed, book a hotel room for a man my grandfather wanted at his table, and had recognized it for what it was. The same thing she had been doing. The same patient, unannounced, quietly documented work of building something real. She had not told me because she had not needed to. I already knew how to do it. I just didn't know I was doing it. I'm sorry too, my mother said, before we hung up. In the voice she used when she forgot to be careful. I should have been watching more. I'm sorry for that. I know, I said. And I did. We were not fixed. We were not even close to fixed. But the door that had closed in me the night my father told me I was not welcome at Christmas had opened a fraction, not all the way, not enough to pretend the last month hadn't happened, but enough to let in air. Not resolution. The acknowledgement of a gap, and the decision to remain in proximity to it rather than widen it further. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Christmas Eve came. I did not go to Sacramento. That was not on the table and I had not expected it to be. I had made other arrangements. Renata and her husband hosted a small dinner, 8 people, in their house in the Irvington neighborhood, a neighborhood of old craftsman houses and mature street trees and the particular warmth of a block that has been lived on for a long time. The warmth that is not performed, that has simply accumulated, the way warmth does when the same people have been feeding each other and showing up for each other for long enough that it requires no announcement. I brought wine, a bottle from a Willamette Valley vineyard I'd visited in September, the kind of wine that tastes like the particular weather of the year it came from, and stayed until the candles had burned down most of the way and the conversation had reached the comfortable rambling phase that only happens after a certain number of hours and a certain number of good things to eat. Renata's husband was a high school history teacher with an encyclopedic knowledge of Pacific Northwest labor history that he deployed with gentle relentlessness regardless of who was in the room, and I had heard most of it before, and I sat in a chair by the fireplace and let it wash over me and felt, quietly, something I had not felt in a while, belonging in a room where I had been specifically asked to be. On the way home, I drove past the building on Northwest 14th. The coffee roaster was closed, the lights off behind the hand-lettered window, the sandwich board inside for the night. The architectural firm's floor was dark. The street was quiet in the way streets are quiet on Christmas Eve, not empty, just held, the whole city briefly between its usual states, suspended in the particular stillness of a night that asks something of you even if you cannot name what it's asking. The building stood on its corner the way it had stood there for however many decades before Dora May found it and decided it was the right shape for what she was building, solid, maintained, unremarkable from the outside, the brick clean and the windows clear and the whole thing simply and quietly there. It did not look like $2.3 million. It did not look like 11 years of rental income, or an LLC with an operating account, or a sequence of documents held by a law firm in Lake Oswego waiting for exactly the right questions to be asked in exactly the right order. It looked like a building on a corner in northwest Portland on a quiet December night, doing what buildings do, standing. I parked in front of it and sat for a while. The engine ticking as it cooled. The street lamp on the corner casting the particular amber of street lamps in wet weather, the brick face of the building absorbing it, the windows giving it back. The sandwich board that the man in the green apron had brought in earlier was visible through the glass, propped against the inside of the door. The coffee roaster's interior was dark except for a single light left on near the back, the kind of light left on not for safety but out of habit, or because it makes the space look less empty. I had a tenant in there. I had a tenant in both spaces. People who had come to this building because it was the right size and the right price and the right address for what they were trying to do, who had signed leases and paid rent and opened their doors every morning without knowing anything about who owned the building beyond the property management entity listed in the lease. DM Holdings LLC. Dora May, building quietly, for longer than any of them had been tenants. I thought about a crossword, 12 across, handed across a hospital waiting room by a woman who had organized herself for the long wait and brought a second puzzle just in case, because that was the kind of person she was, not pessimistic, not anxious. Just practically prepared for the reality of a world in which things take longer than expected and the only useful response is to bring enough material to fill the time productively. Both things at once. The word that meant noon and the word that meant a line on the globe, the same word for both because the puzzle constructor had seen the overlap and decided to use it. I thought about a building bought in 2009 for a granddaughter who had just told someone, over phone, on an October walk, without hesitating, that she was going to stay. I thought about patience. Not passivity. Not waiting. The specific texture of building something quietly, for a long time, for a person who doesn't know yet that you are building it, and trusting that when the time is right, they will find it and know what to do. I thought about 88 missed calls. My phone, that Christmas Eve, was silent. Somewhere in Sacramento, my parents were at their house, the Wheelers from next door probably still there, the table cleared, the tree still lit. Magnolia from Fresno. Dallas. The gathering my father had arranged and I had been, with love, excluded from. I thought about that table and felt nothing sharp about it, not peace exactly, not indifference, something more precisely calibrated than either. The table was there and I was here and both of those things were simply true, and the distance between them was not a wound and not a relief but just the particular shape of this December, which had turned out to have a different shape than anyone had planned for. I sat in front of the building for a while longer. Then I drove home to the Caldwell Building, pressed the button for my elevator, and rode it up to 43 in the particular quiet of a holiday night, the building holding its breath the way buildings do when most of their inhabitants are somewhere else, the hum of the heating system the only sound, the city below doing what it always did, bridges lit and river moving and the whole long patient fact of it continuing on. There are things I know now that I did not know at the beginning of December. I know that my grandmother spent 13 years building something she never mentioned, never announced, and never asked for credit for. I know she sequenced it so carefully that even a closed estate couldn't swallow it. I know she trusted me to follow the chain, not because she told me to, but because she had spent 31 years watching me work the 12 across, and she had concluded, in the accounting precise way she concluded everything, that I would. I know that certain sentences are tools. I know that a sentence deployed with enough frequency and with enough confidence will wear a groove in the air of a family, and that the groove can feel, after long enough, like the shape of the truth. I know that the sentence about having nothing and no one is one of the oldest tools there is, older than real estate, older than inheritance law, older than any document a notary has ever pressed a seal into. It is a sentence that requires you to believe you are small. It only works if you believe that. I know what it cost my father, at 58, to say I'm sorry without a qualifier. I don't know if it will mean anything in a year, in 5 years, across the time that the probate hearing will take and the time that follows it. I know that meaning is not the same as cost, and that cost is not the same as repair. I know that the gap between where we are and where things might one day be is not a distance I can measure yet, and that the honest thing, the precisely honest thing, is to say so rather than reaching for a resolution that hasn't arrived. I know what my mother meant when she said she should have been watching more. I know that she said it in her real voice, the one underneath, and that saying it cost her something, and that I believe her. I know what Dora May meant when she said both things at once. First, what you track cannot be rewritten. The record exists whether anyone acknowledges it or not. This is what the reference file was, and what Dora May's ledgers were before it, and what the deed with the notary seal pressed into the heavy paper is now. Second, patience is not waiting. It is building, in the quiet, for the person who will know what to do when the time comes. It is buying a building on a December afternoon in 2009 and saying nothing about it for 13 years. It is handing someone the 12 across and trusting them to work it out, without explaining what the answer is supposed to be. It is keeping a photograph on a dresser, in a plain wood frame, of someone standing at the edge of a gray Pacific winter who has already decided, without needing to announce it, that she is staying. Third, the sentence that tells you that you have nothing only reaches you if you have already decided, somewhere below articulation, that it might be true. That decision is the only thing it needs. Without it, the sentence is just words in the air of a marble lobby, landing and settling and leaving no mark at all. I know I never quite believed it. And I know, because she made sure I would know, that the woman who built all of this for me knew that too. She had known it when she handed me the 12 across in a Sacramento waiting room and waited, with the serene patience of someone who has made her peace with what she can and cannot change, for the answer to surface. She had known it when she watched me say yes to Portland without hesitating. She had known it every time she said a second crossword on a knee, or asked a crossing letter question over phone, or kept a photograph on a dresser of a granddaughter standing alone at the edge of a gray Pacific winter, looking out at something she had already decided she was staying for. She had built this for me not because she knew what my father would do, but because she knew who I was. Those are different things. The first would have been a hedge. The second was a gift. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If this reminded you of your own family, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for the next one.